And do please remember to turn your cell phones off. We are taping and it can be disruptive and we don't want to have you arrested. So we'll keep going. And we'll now have a joint presentation by Kenneth and Ruth Wright of Wright Water Engineers and Wright Hydrological Institute on the fascinating topic of the Inca roads, water use and handling. The Wrights, Ruth and Ken, to me really represent the example of the Warmi Kari, the woman-man being that people in communities speak of, and the duality and that energy of the joining of universal forces and human endeavor that they have studied so well. Ruth and Ken Wright.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We really appreciate your being here in the afternoon of Thursday, and we also want to say how fortunate we feel being here, and we thank Ramiro Matos for the opportunity. Today we're going to focus on 3 sites in terms of the Inca road system. One is at Machu Picchu, the other is at Topon, and then Ollantaytambo. And many of you know all 3 of those sites. And what we're interested in is the infrastructure that supports the road. The road is more than just the pathway that connected the empire from one end to the other. Along the way, there were rest houses and water supplies and the all-important drainage to keep the road from deteriorating. Here we see Mount Veronica. Mount Veronica overlooks one of the most famous of the portions of the road, the Inca Trail, from kilometer 88 to Machu Picchu. And of course, Machu Picchu is a marvelous sight early in the morning. And from a nearby mountaintop, one can see the Machu Picchu stretched out in front of us. And if you look closely, you can see the Inca Trail coming in from the left and getting down to the enclave. And if you look carefully, you can see the guardhouse. And the guardhouse represents security. The Inca Road was controlled by the state, and not everybody could travel on it. But it was certainly a military installation. The Inca guardhouse, or the Machu Picchu guardhouse, seen from the side, shows the holy mountain of Yunantan in the background, and the wonderful curved terraces that were used to support the steep mountainside. What I want to do is go to Ollantaytambo now. And Ollantaytambo is a special spot at the confluence of the Vilcabamba, Rio Vilcabamba, and the Rio Patacancha, and in the foreground we see a water fountain jet. Right at Ollantaytambo is the Inca Bridge, and what we're interested in here is the fact that we have foundations from 500 years ago still standing. Somehow, we don't know how, they were able to withstand the forces of the river, high velocities and erosive forces, and the bridge abutment on each side, and the supporting pier in the middle is still whole. In 1874, Squire, in traveling through South America, Peru in particular, sketched that same bridge at Ollantaytambo. And it's interesting to see how little the foundations have changed over that last 135 years or so. Here you see the foundations. I mentioned water infrastructure. Here we see Armin de Gabaja, the chief archaeologist for INC for the Cusco area, pointing out drainage works. This is a wall supporting the Inca Road near Ollantaytambo, and she's demonstrating the importance of drainage for endurance. A little beyond that, on the way to Pachar, here we have a picture of Arminda standing at what she calls a section marker, administrative separation between one part of the road and another. The separation being this large curved stone. Just beyond that stone, you can see the road with walls on both sides, heading off to into the background towards a fortress. The fortress is a Chocana. And in 1874, a squire sketched that fortress, as you can see here. And it was you could say that it's symbolic of the importance of controlling access and use of the Inca road system. A little beyond that fortress that we call Chocana is Pachar. Pachar is a little community, and for us, it's important because it's another Inca bridge in the vicinity of Ollantaytambo. Original foundations, and the modern people have put a footbridge across the abutments on either side and the pier in the middle. Sketching up the bridge for record purposes, we see that what the sizes are, and the span from one abutment to the other was nearly 18 meters, more than 50 feet. Looking along the bridge alignment, you can see that the modern people in this village respected the right-of-way of the ancient Inca road, and you can see how they maintained the right and left boundaries of the Inca road and didn't encroach on the road right-of-way with their homes on either side. Looking the other way from Pachar, you can see how well the road has endured, and that it's still used by the modern people for their farm to market products. I talked to you about Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo is situated at the confluence of the Rio Patacancha and the main river. That sometimes we call the Urubamba, but we're calling it Vilcabamba. A few things to point out here. We saw the Chocana Fortress, which is located there. We saw the Chocana to Pachar road system that was so well maintained. The Pachar Bridge. Going the other way, we see the first bridge we saw is that Inca Bridge here. And there's another trail that I'm going to show you now is the Inca Pintai Trail, Inca road system, and it goes part way before it ends. And the ancient town of Ollantaytambo, which is still lived in. The next photograph is going to be the Inca Pintai roadway, well constructed. The walls on the right side and then the remains of the left side wall demonstrate the width of this particular roadway, which is some 17 feet wide. Typically, we would be measuring about 11 feet for the width of the road. Another view of that road to Inca Pintai. And when we got to Inca Pintai, the remains of the defensive wall still stand. And then looking up the cliffside, you can see the building Inca Patay building up high on the cliffside. The main gate at Ollantaytambo has been damaged because of road construction, but much of it still stands, and it's fine construction, and it illustrates how the infrastructure was established so as to control access and use of the road to appropriate users. Just beyond into Machu Picchu, into Ollantaytambo, is the Avenue of the 100 Niches. Originally, those niches were full height, and this road has been filled in over the years, leaving just the tops of these niches. On the other side of the river, the road to the quarry is well constructed and has endured well. The road cuts through solid rock, and Squire in 1874 called this a defensive point on the trail. And then finally, I want to show you another type of infrastructure. It's a place for people to sleep. It's a two-story tambo on the opposite side of the river from Ollantaytambo. And if we look in the far background, we can see the remains of Ollanta Palace. That was called that Ollanta Palace by Squire. And Ruth is going to take over and show you a little bit more.
I'm taking you to a new site. This is Tipon. And we call Tipon a water garden, and you'll see why. First of all, there is this huge terrace system that was created by the Inca. If you climb up high on the background, which is what Ken did, he took this picture, and nobody really understands that this is what happened. The Inca took the East Mesa and cut it down and filled what they call a quebrada, we call a ravine, and this is where those terraces are. So this was not done with a bulldozer. This was probably hundreds of Inca laborers with baskets taking the soil off of the East Mesa and putting it into the ravine. Now, since it's a ravine or a quebrada, it was created by running water, and so this would have been a very hazardous situation for the soil that's been put in there. However, the Inca knew what they were doing, and so they have a series of beautiful walls that have stood for 500 years with water coming down in a very controlled fashion from one terrace to another. This is the entire system here. The reason it's here is because there is a huge spring that has been used for time immemorial. In fact, on the hillside above this area, there are ancient ruins that are prehistoric. So they have 11 terraces. Each one of those terraces has one of those beautiful walls. And then there are 2 terraces up here, which are above the spring, and I'll get onto that later as to how they managed to grow crops there. So here we have 3 systems. Here's one of the systems and 2 canals on this side. And of course, the Inca didn't just use the spring. They would end up making it absolutely gorgeous with these 4 drop structures, which were not only for the purpose of moving the irrigation water, but also for ritual purposes. So, what do they do for the 2 terraces above? They went uphill to the Rio Pucara and created canals that came on down using surface water. And engineers of today would call that what is it? This is a system that has two different water sources that are both surface and water. So they had to go quite a ways down, and they had to cross the valley, and they have an aqueduct that goes from the top all the way down. And you will notice that it has a drainage culvert, but that's also for people to go from one side of the valley to the other. And there's an Inca trail that goes alongside. So alongside the aqueduct, you can walk all the way up to Pucara. On the way down, they built a beautiful temple system. They call it the Intihuatana with the jagged rocks, which they have here. But the water was diverted so that it would come through this temple and could be used as for ritual purposes. So water was very, very important for temples and ritual purposes. They brought it on through. Some of it's underground, some of it's above ground, and then they had an exit there to take it on further down. So this is typical of Inca construction. Beautiful, very solid walls, drop structures that are fountains that come on down, and then the famous stairways, which we call flying stairways. So now we go back to Machu Picchu. Huayna Picchu in the background. This is taken from Machu Picchu Mountain, and here you see the river, which is now called the Urubamba River, with Machu Picchu in the center. This is how the Inca would have gotten there. They were carried. There's the Inca and his Koya, his queen, and a child. And they would have stopped at Tambos along the way. That's like a rest stop. Here we have a series of 16 fountains. Everything is beautiful. From the resting area here, there's one of the windows looks directly onto this waterfall. And so they use their natural resources for beauty as well as for functionality. And here's the beautiful waterfall. Coming up the Inca Road, again, very well built. This is a very special road that goes to Machu Picchu, which was a royal estate of the Emperor Pachacuti. It comes up here, and this area here is called Inti Punco, Gate of the Sun. If you look at it from the other side, you can see there are porters here who have helped people travel along the Inca Trail. I like to call them chasquis, like the runners, because they help the people, and they carry things for them, and are in fact sort of messengers and portage. Some of the other people here are up here to look at the view. A lot of people come up here from Machu Picchu. It's a very good trail, and it maybe takes about half an hour, and they come up here to watch the sun, and that's the view that you would have up there, and the tourist travelers go up there to watch the sun come up, and it's this spectacular. The Incas love their mountains, their apus. Here is one of those people that I call a chasqui. He's wearing his regular uniform, and in back there is a station, a security station. Most people just come through the security station and go on up the trail, but we stopped and spent quite a bit of time there measuring it. This is a huaca, which is a very fine religious place. When we first came there, we saw that there was a series of steps going up into the hillside. We thought, well, they don't just do that for nothing. So we studied the site. There's that huaca that I pointed out. Here the trail comes up to Inti Punco, and there's the stairway. Well, when we took down some of the bushes, we found a trail that goes out over to some villages where they would have brought food in for Machu Picchu. But as a security station, there's a little stairway here and a platform, which I will show you. This is what it looks like, and people just zip on by. But if you go behind here, which we did, there's this station. There's a couple of stairs go up onto a platform, and from the platform you can look down onto Machu Picchu. Part of the way down is a huge rock. It's about 50 feet tall, and it sort of leans forward. And Hiram Bingham, on this platform here, found a number of burials, the most famous of which is an Inca lady. You see here the top. So they buried her. She died at Machu Picchu. And it's very unusual because they buried her dog with her. It was about the size of a collie. And then some artifacts. And if you look at this little artifact, you can see it's the same. Hiram Bingham put that in his famous book, which described all of his finds at Machu Picchu. And I realized that was the same one. Well, more than that, when they had the traveling exhibit from Yale, there it was, and it was like meeting an old friend. Now it's at Yale. So there's the overhanging rock, and the Inca Trail continues. Here's what I called a chasqui. And here, of course, is the famous Inca Trail that people come in on with their backpacks, and the guardhouse. Now, if you go over here, there's another trail that takes you to an Inca bridge. No, it's not the kind of Inca bridge you've been seeing. It's made so that if they want to, they can just take these away. And there's a big sign for tourists that says peligroso, which is danger. And so you're not supposed to move over here and try to cross the bridge. There's a possibility that this is the trail to a very new, fairly new place, newly rediscovered after Hiram Bingham, called Yactapata. But it's very difficult to get there from here. Continuing on the Inca Road to Machu Picchu, here are some people standing and talking, but here is one of the workers, and there is a drainage system that comes through here, and he's probably working on it, maybe cleaning it out. But the interesting thing is, I told you how much they love their mountains, so this is a drainage system, and many people so look under the hole, but if you do, there's a mountain across the river, and there it is perfectly framed by the outlet of the drainage system. It's Putacusi. So the Inca Trail takes you to the grand entrance of Machu Picchu. This is the main gate, and there's a mountain perfectly formed in the middle of it. That's Huayna Picchu.
Well, going through the main gate into Machu Picchu, the trail seemingly ended. Well, we knew that this wonderful Inca Trail wouldn't be ending at Machu Picchu. It had to go somewhere. So at any rate, we, working with our local archaeologist, Alfredo Valencia, and his wife, Arminda Gabaja, we began exploring the east flank of Machu Picchu, trying to find the extension of this Inca Trail from kilometer 88 into Machu Picchu. We started out thinking that the best way of exploring for the trail would be crossing the Urubamba River. It didn't take us long to realize that the water was too swift and too hazardous. So what happened is that we began searching for the missing trail from Machu Picchu, going down rather than up. Here's the outer wall of Machu Picchu, and it continues on. That particular trail at that time continued on around the precipice, and the Urubamba River is way down below, about 1,600 feet. The clearing took a lot of time and effort using local macheteros. Down on the, about halfway down the east flank of Machu Picchu mountain, looking down at the Urubamba, we came across these series of terraces. Terraces that were built to support the trail, to keep the trail from slipping down the mountainside, because the trail, the mountainside is very steep, like perhaps a 30% slope, quite unstable. And the stairway here, this is not the trail, this is just access stairs to maintaining the terraces. We didn't take long before we came across a fountain, a ceremonial fountain along the Inca Road, the Inca Road heading down to the Urubamba River, a drop of about 1,600 feet. And we cleaned it out and saw that the design of the fountains, these are fountains, two of the fountains together, the design of them was very similar to the fountains up in Machu Picchu, several hundred feet uphill. Here you see the Inca Trail coming towards us, bypassing the fountain, one of the fountains, and the other fountains just uphill from that, and a lot of clearing and cutting of vegetation. And here you see the trail looking to the east. Stairways, some 10 feet wide, haven't been restored. This is just the way it was in uncovering them. The trail then extended this way and then continued on down to the left bank of the Urubamba River. Looking down at the cleared area from Huayna Picchu Mountain, you can see the extensive system of terraces that had been installed primarily to support the trail, which the trail coming out of the from the right-hand side, coming along that wall, and then passing through the series of terrace walls, and then the terraces could be used for agricultural purposes. But secondarily, the main purpose was for supporting the wall and providing a foundation for it. At the very bottom, when we got down to the Urubamba River, we found that the trail had been carved into solid bedrock, stairways here, and then the supporting wall up above. And at the Urubamba River, we looked long and hard for the location of Inca bridge foundations, but couldn't find any. That either had been completely washed out, or the crossing was not at this particular location. Just for reference purposes, beyond the trees is the location of the railroad. Here you see the trail. This is an aerial photograph taken by the U.S. Air Force back in about 1963. But the trail, starting from Machu Picchu, cutting down the mountainside, and down to the very bottom where we thought we would find bridge abutments, but did not. And the Urubamba River then continues on around on its way down towards the Amazonian forest. Some of you have heard of Mandor Pampa, and Mandor Pampa is where Hiram Bingham camped overnight, and situated on the right bank of the Urubamba River. We liked the fountains on the trail, part of the important infrastructure, providing water for the visitor, but also serving ceremonial purposes, as well as a wonderful view. Here Ruth is pointing to the outlet of the fountain, which provided, narrowed, as you can see, narrowed as it flowed towards its terminus, and it's narrower at the ends to speed up the flow, to make it easier for filling of water jugs. One of the things that we were very impressed with is as we cleaned out this fountain along the Inca Road, and at the very moment we cleaned out the last part of the channel, suddenly before our eyes it began flowing all by itself for the first time in some maybe 500 years. And we were very impressed with the hydraulics and the design of the fountain realizing that after all of these centuries of being buried and unused, that merely cleaning out the muck from the channel allowed it to reactivate itself and to begin flowing. This is also impressive to our macheteros. Here we have a local Quechua boy who worked for us for that several weeks. And you can see he's machetero, he's got his machete here. But he was so impressed with the water beginning to flow by itself that he took part of his lunch, dug a hole, and prayed to Machu Picchu, to Mount Yunantin, Machu Picchu, and the other holy mountains, including Pachamama, asking Pachamama to keep the fountain flowing forever. It was such a good water supply that we were able to use it for filling our water jugs for the workers and for ourselves. And then 6 months later, we went back. The vegetation had grown over, but it was still flowing after some 6 months of absence. And so we're very impressed with the hydraulics and the reliability of this water supply along the Inca Road system on the east flank of Machu Picchu. And we're particularly impressed with being able to find the extension of the Inca Trail down to the Urubamba River. And that concludes our lecture, and thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Be careful.
Keep following me.
Thank you, Ruth and Ken. And isn't that a wonderful story? To me, that's just the essence of sustainability, that after 500 years, you clean out a little fountain and the water begins to flow again, and it's pure. So, wonderful story.